Hello, Joel Block. Welcome to the Doing CX Right show.
Hey, thanks for having me. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing really well. And I'm excited for this conversation, mostly because of where you started in your career that correlates so much to my family that my followers probably don't even know about. But we'll get to that first. Please share. What do you do? What is your career?
I spent the majority of my career in the venture capital in the Wall Street, the venture capital in the hedge fund business, which is a Wall Street business. It's kind of gobbledygook. It's a fancy way of saying the money business. I mean, we bought and sold companies. I invested in many startups, early stage companies. We bought real estate. We built real estate. We built buildings and then bought companies. So I've been involved in moving a lot of money around. That's that's what I do. I move money around. So
Money's a product.
actually, you'd be surprised. People don't realize this, but the money business in the United States is a giant business, and they don't really think about it. But just like farmers sell potatoes, Wall Street sells money. It rents money. That's what it does. That's the main business that Wall Street is in, and it puts money to work, and it makes money on money, and it rents money, and it puts money out there, and it sends the money out, and then the money comes back, multiplied, and that's kind of what we do. And most people really have no idea this is going on, but it's one of the biggest businesses in the United States.
Oh, I can't wait to explore that with you, but let's get a little bit more into who you are first. And that is, what's a fun fact people may not know about you?
Well, as a youngster, I became a CPA. I mean, out of college, I became a CPA. I worked at Price Waterhouse, the big accounting firm. And one of the jobs that I worked on there, I counted ballots for the Academy Awards. So that was kind of a cool thing that happened in like 1985, 86. And that was just a really, I've had a lot of really cool assignments. I've done tax returns for incredibly powerful people, and I've had investors who are athletes and celebrities, and I've had a lot of really fun things happen. And I just, listen, I've been very blessed to have been in a lot of different places and done a lot of really cool things. But maybe the most important thing is where I started. And I started as a youngster while I was just starting college. I had become a professional blackjack player. I actually was going to Las Vegas every single week, taking money out of those casinos. And I'd come back and we played on teams. I played by myself. And I actually was recruited on one of the great teams in the 1980s. This was a little bit before the MIT teams and Kevin Spacey's movie 21, which documented that journey brilliantly. It was a lot like that. And we'd go into casinos, a team of us, and we would just take money out of those establishments, and it was incredibly fun. It was just an exhilarating time in my life.
So that's where we share a lot in common, per se, my family, not necessarily directly me, but my mother is on Wall Street. She was started out a career in accounting. She and her three other sisters and my grandparents. So accountants to Wall Street and then card counting.
And that's amazing, really.
It really is. And Vegas, I didn't go to Disney World. I went to Vegas as a kid. So much. And we didn't even go to Atlantic City in New Jersey, where I'm close to. We didn't even go there. We went to Vegas on a junket all the time. So very similar and pretty ironic.
Those were kind of the days when Wall Street did a lot of those boondoggles. They don't really do that so much anymore. The IRS, the government kind of cracked down on a lot of it. But that was pretty popular. So you kind of got to take advantage of something that's sort of not there anymore.
Oh, definitely. And obviously the card counting, I mean, the decks got bigger and it became harder to do any kind of counting. And so casinos got smarter and they threw you out.
Let me tell you something. I wonder if the casinos really got smarter or if they sort of were cutting their own noses off to spite their face. I'll tell you why. They may have made the rules more complicated to keep guys like me away. I mean, guys like me took millions of dollars out of casinos. But people like everybody else, the rest of the folks, because we could take money out of casinos, they believed the game was beatable. And consequently, blackjack became the biggest game in Vegas, earning billions of dollars a year. So to keep a few guys like me away, they made the rules really, really complicated and they made it less fun for everybody else. So what you have to think about is by having, by cutting the deck in half and not dealing all the way to the back, how many hands do they not deal? How much money don't they make by doing that? By changing the odds, let's say a lot of casinos, they don't pay 3-2 on blackjack anymore. They pay 6-5. By doing that, how many people are frustrated that they're not getting what they expect to get and they don't want to play blackjack anymore? So that's a whole customer service lesson by itself. Is the experience of the customer has been degraded because they're concerned about guys like me when the truth is we're sort of a loss leader.
Okay. You got me excited here. So before I go into doing customer experience right and your journey you just talked about, I do want to ask you, from all the wisdom you have right now, if you could go back to the younger 20-year-old Joel, based on what you know now, what would you tell the younger you?
That's a hard question for me. Number one, I never look backwards. I only look forwards. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about these kind of things. I might have gone into investment banking instead of into accounting as a youngster. Even though I didn't last in accounting, I only stayed in accounting for a couple of years because I wasn't a soldier. It wasn't for me. I probably would have gone into investment banking and I probably would have loved that as much as what I ended up doing. I mean, they're kind of related skills, but that might have been the only thing I might have said, you know what, let's do that. There was one other thing. I built a company in the early 1990s where we invented the concept of delivering stock quotes to investors by fax. So fax machines, imagine in 1990, they weren't popular. Not everybody had them. In fact, they were very expensive and not that many businesses had them. And so me and another guy invented the concept of taking stock market information and giving specific information to people that wanted it, like a personal newspaper. And although I went to 100 different companies to try to get investors and different things, I ended up getting one outfit to give me $10 million. They just loved this idea. Thought it was like, this was way before the internet. There was no electronics. It was a cool thing. And so they gave me $10 million. And I went to Wall Street and I got one of the big brokerage houses to buy subscriptions from us. And they actually wrote a check that was so big, the investor got all their cash back in 6 months. So, I mean, it was a successful deal. And I was on the road selling. And that's what I love to do, is to talk about ideas and get people to do my ideas. And that's what I did. And I ended up selling that company in 1995. And I made one mistake. And the mistake was I should have engaged PR, a lot more PR to tell the world what I had accomplished. That was probably a mistake that I wish I could go back and fix, because I would have done enormously better going into the .com era than I was able to do. Yeah. So other than that, I don't look back too much. I just, listen, I did pretty good, and and I'm happy with how things turned out.
All right. Customer experience. So the product is money. There has to be some relationship in there to get people to buy and sell, and interactions. And all right, so.
Well, let me comment. Let me comment on that, because it's almost entirely about relationships.
Yes.
Because somebody can go and get 5% return on their money, or 7% return on their money, or 8%, or whatever the number is. I mean, those are just numbers. So if they can go get that anywhere, the only variable is who's going to give it to them and what the asset class is and what the risk factors are that are involved. And so the relationship has a lot to do with this. And that's a critically important component.
All right. Now, advantage player. So whether we're talking about blackjack, whether we're talking about stocks and product money, whether we're talking about any solution, there's an advantage that you can have. Can you talk about what is the advantage player and how does it relate
Sure.
to companies?
Sure. So, most people don't like to be ripped off too much. They just, it's funny how people are, they don't like to get ripped off. But when they go to Las Vegas, they let their guard down and they deliberately play games where they know they're being ripped off. It's what it is. And the ripoff in Las Vegas has a name, and the name is called the house advantage. And the
Yes.
only way to defeat the house advantage is using the strategies of advantage play, which are these killer strategies, and they're implemented by advantage players. And I was always referred to as an advantage player, as a professional card player, because I could take money out of those casinos and there was nothing they could do about it. I mean, they could ask me to leave if they figured me out, and that only happened one time. But other than that, um, I was better at the game than they were. And that's it. And there wasn't any cheating. There weren't any machines. I just learned how to do it. And by the way, in 5 minutes, I could teach anybody how to do this. And when I do a keynote, one of the first things I do is I teach the audience how to count a deck of cards, and they eat it up. And then I show them a few cards, and I show them, let's say 9 cards, and they always know the 10th card. And that's really fun because, they just can't believe it. And what that really proves is that all 7 people at the table see the same information. 6 of the people might as well be sitting there in the dark. And 1 person knows so much they know what cards are coming next. And that is advantage play. That's knowing so much about what's happening around you that you know what kinds of things are likely to come next. And then we transition into business. And here's the point for business is you want to have as many advantage players on your team as you can. I mean, that's the goal, is to have your team filled up with advantage players, people who play at the top of their game. They're in the top 5 or 10% of people. And they're really just doing a great job. And they're motivated. They're making things happen. And there's a lot of tricks to making that happen, by the way, getting people to feel good about themselves so they accomplish and play at that level. But that's what advantage play is. Advantage play, my adaptation to business is that they're killer strategies that companies can use to outrun, outgun, outfox, and outplay their competition. Because look, I'm going to tell you that when it comes to money, everything's rigged. It just is. The money business is a rigged business. But the truth is, so is everything. The world is rigged against small businesses. It's probably rigged against women. It's probably rigged against young people. I mean, it's rigged against a lot of people, That doesn't mean that it's terrible and everybody wants it to be unrigged. It's never going to be unrigged. The trick is to figure out the rig and outrun the rig, because that's the only way you're ever going to, get ahead, is to figure out the rig and run around it.
So disrupting competitors' futures, outperforming, disrupting, what gets in the way? What do you want people to realize or take a step back and look at?
Well, listen, our whole concept is, we call it TSA, like at the airport. You got to think differently than other people. You got to see and notice what other people don't see or notice, so that you can take actions that other people will not take. Think, see, and act. And most people are so busy being average, and they're getting results that are average, and they're doing things that are average. The truth is, they're not doing things that are kind of out of left field. People don't expect things out of left field. And when you come out of left field, you control everything, because that's just not what people expect. They expect the ball to come right down the middle. They just don't expect something that's irregular or different. And so probably a big part of the success formula has to do with coming out of left field or doing something that people don't expect, the element of surprise. And, it's just all those kind of components make a really big difference.
I love that you talk about expectations, which actually expectations are getting higher now. And yesterday's promise is getting boring. And we have to keep raising the game. And as you said, outperform. Predicting the future, though, I mean, I bet people are scratching their heads and saying, how the heck do you do that? So is it just math? Is it?
No, it's not math at all. I'm not a mathematical person. I'm an accountant. You know what that means? That means I'm really good at arithmetic. A 6th grader can do what I do. I don't have any more math training than a sixth grader. And I'm not even kidding. I mean, maybe I took a few more classes, but I didn't get past like middle school or high school math. That's it. And I don't remember most of any of the stuff that I learned in those classes. So it really is about seeing and noticing what other people don't see or notice, looking for hints, tells, cues, and signs, things that are right in front of you that other people are simply not noticing. And when you notice those things, and usually there's a system or a process. And I always go back to blackjack because it's such a great metaphor. I mean, I don't teach people how to play blackjack. I mean, that's not my business. My business is about buying companies, advising companies. I work with a lot of funds and people in the money business and other kinds of companies. But when people, learn to think differently, they learn to see the world differently, all of a sudden they're able to read between the lines in a way that they just couldn't do it before. I'll give you an example. So besides hints, tells, signs, and cues, which are little like maybe body language, or maybe let's say that somebody responds to email in 5 minutes. They're always responding real fast to email, or they answer their phone or they call you back or whatever the response is. And then something happens and they don't call you back for like several days. And they're not on vacation and they're not sick and they're everything is normal, but they're not responding. What's the body language of that? I mean, what do you notice from that? And we have to get used to really paying attention. And when you're thinking, and I'm not talking about overreading into things, but the truth is that person might not be very excited about whatever I just proposed to them, and they don't know how to respond back to me. And so they're just doing nothing instead. And we have to kind of maybe let them off the hook. So we can kind of read what isn't being said. And some things people are good at. A lot of it we're not very good at. The other component about predicting the future has to do with what I call high limit questions. These are questions that get people to think in a different way. And when I ran my venture capital group, we would invest in companies. Our fund would invest in companies. And our board of directors, and I was the chair of our board, I would call a meeting and I'd say, okay, look, somebody put a fact pattern on the table and put something, whatever you want on the table, and let's explore it together. Now, here's what a high limit question is. A high limit question is one that's interactive. It brings the best out of people. By the way, ChatGPT does not produce high limit questions. It produces college level questions. Everybody can do a college level question, but only the best people can do a high limit question. And I'll give you an example of one of those in a second. I don't want to keep talking too much if you have another question, but I'll give you an example in a minute.
Yeah, well, I want to hear your example, but I also want to emphasize about predictive behaviors and future behaviors and being aware of that is in a CX world, we also emphasize that looking at customer feedback from multi-channels, social media, ratings and reviews, contact forms, what people say on there, your surveys, your chat conversations, and actually aggregating it. And this is where the AI can be helpful, is to extract those emotion-based words and predict based on that someone's going to leave your brand. So I wanted to highlight that feedback is a gift and not everybody's using it to predict the future.
Well, listen, that's 100% true. There's other things too. There's little kinds of body languages. If someone's on the phone, the pauses between their words, if they take a long pause, they might be exasperated and upset. They're just thinking of what to say next. Or if you hear them huffing and puffing, that might be a pretty good clue that something's wrong, which I would expect they would already know something's wrong. But I mean, there's all these things, and companies should be aggregating this information so that, here's the thing. Most of the training that people receive in companies is very low level. It's very foundational. Not that foundational learning is bad, but people who are highly accomplished need high level surgical skills training. This is the kind of stuff that would be surgical skills. Learning to listen to breathing, learning to listen to pauses, certain kinds of vocabulary words. Those are the kinds of things that people who get really good at that get really, really good at what they're doing. And those are the people that could really learn to save the big problems. So if you've got an escalation group, I would imagine that, before a customer leaves, you move them to the escalation group. Those people have to be surgically trained in really high level kinds of stuff. And our Advantage Player Institute, this is all we do is give surgical skills training to people who are at the top of their game. That might not be the front line, although the front line really needs to be well trained. But certainly if there's escalation, you got to make sure your escalation people are incredibly well trained.
Yeah, the escalation people, though I also want people listening to know that whatever your title is, from CEO to intern, you have a customer experience job, whether you realize it or not. And it's important that you understand that. And if you don't, well, we need to talk.
Well, I've always thought the same thing, not about CX, but I think about selling because I've really always been in the world of selling. And I've always said that everybody sells. In an organization, everybody sells. And you're either selling or you're unselling. And that goes all the way from the top salespeople all the way to the janitor and the people who sweep the floor.
Yeah.
If you are rude to a customer, you're unselling, period. Now, you might turn that into a CX kind of a discussion, but from my perspective, from a selling perspective, you're either selling or unselling. So people are either creating a great experience, which makes it easier to sell, or they're creating a negative experience, which makes it harder to sell. And one of those two dynamics is happening all the time. And so there's a great crossover, I guess, probably between our vocabulary. But, that's how I've always thought about it.
Yes. Now I'm sitting here smiling because I just had a flashback of going to the American Stock Exchange as a kid a gazillion times with my mom and talk about yelling and screaming and cursing. I mean, right there on the floor, it's everything you would not say in outside of Wall Street. So a little ironic.
But you know what? But there aren't any customers there. That's just the culture, and that's what everybody expects. There's no outsiders in that environment. That environment, in fact, you can't even get through security as an outsider. I mean, it's very, very tight, especially after 9/11. It became impossible. But that's the nature of that environment. And so, first of all, in the 80s, when you're probably referring to it, there were few or no women. So, the world has gotten a little softer because there's more women around. But, listen, in the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, when there started to be some women, the world was pretty ferocious.
Oh, yes. And I could spend this whole episode just on that factor, having grown up with a mom who's a change agent in that regard. So, as we're getting close to the end, I want to ask you, in terms of companies and listeners here who are hungry to disrupt the industry they're in and take away their competitors' futures, obviously it starts with good leadership. What is the best leadership advice you have received or given?
Well, I think that the most important thing that great leaders can recognize is that everybody on the team is smart and has something to share and can bring to the table. And I think that this is a good time to go back to that predictive logic stuff we were talking about in these high limit questions, because really great leaders ask high limit questions. They ask really great questions that involve other people. So let me just tell you this real quick story. And an example that I've used. I mean, there could be 100 examples, 1,000 examples, but I just zeroed in on one the last couple of weeks because it's a hot topic. So a high limit question would be one where you get a lot of people to contribute, some kind of crowdsourced information, So for example, somebody will be sitting around the table like our venture capital company. We're thinking about what companies do we want to buy? What do we want to invest in? I mean, how are we? Because we got to predict the future. We got to predict what's going to happen next. So somebody would put a fact pattern out there. And the fact pattern could be anything, like during the pandemic, there's no cars on the road. Well, I really was never satisfied with somebody just making a statement like that. So I would always respond, SWIT. So what's the impact of that? Let's take it to the next level. What's the impact of there being no cars? Well, if there's no cars, that means the cities aren't writing traffic tickets. It means that they're not selling parking spaces. It means that the hot dog vendor in downtown isn't selling hot dogs. And so that's what. So let's take a more live example, because that's already an old example. This is something brand new. So there's all these brand new weight loss drugs. All this new stuff is happening and it's all over the news. And it was the rage in Hollywood a couple of years ago. And now it's become kind of a national craze and people are really excited about it. So what I would do is I sit down with my group and I'd say, so what's the impact of these weight loss drugs? And somebody'd say, well, people are going to wear smaller clothes. And somebody else would say they're going to be eating less. And then somebody would say that they're not going to be buying fad diets anymore. And somebody else would say they're going to be going to the hospital less. So they put out a bunch of things that they would think are the impact. And in a brainstorming environment, every idea, crazy or not, you write it down. You don't judge the idea, you just write it down. But then I'd ask this follow-up question. And the follow-up question is where the money got made. And this is how we placed our bets. I'd say, who wins and who loses? So let's take these ideas and put them into one side of the T box or another, to draw a line down the middle of the page and put the better ideas on this side, the losers. Does better and worse, by the way. You make money on the way up and you make money on the way down. So there's money to be made on both sides. So let's figure out which of these. So if people are losing weight and they're going to be wearing smaller clothes, certain retailers are going to stand to benefit from this. Certain retailers, by the way, are going to stand to lose from that. Fast food restaurants would probably be losers. Healthy food establishments might be winners. Pharmaceutical companies that make drugs might be winners, but the ones that make some of these other kinds of medicines might be losers because people would need less medicine. So you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
So you can, when I talk about predict the future, I'm not talking about predicting an earthquake somewhere in the world or predicting the price of the stock tomorrow. But there are certain things that we can talk about with pretty good certainty that's going to happen. And then we could place our bets and we could bet on companies. We could find companies that we want to buy. And no matter what industry somebody's in, they need to do an exercise like this. And maybe they need a little bit of help to get through an exercise like that because it doesn't come easy to them. But that's the kind of work they got to do. And that's how you predict the future.
Awesome. Well, what is the lasting takeaway in a sentence or two that you want people to remember today?
I want them to think differently. I want them to see and notice what other people don't so they can take actions that other people won't.
Magical. Well, I will share all about you, your website, your socials, and all the things you're creating to gain that advantage in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here. It was so much fun.
Well, thanks for having me. It was fun to talk to you.
Thank you.